So today we'll be talking about nutrition. Nutrients can be divided into two main categories, macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are those nutrients that the body needs in large amounts. These provide the body with energy in the form of calories. Micronutrients are those nutrients that the body needs in smaller amounts. So what are some of the macronutrients? Number one is carbohydrates. Some of the functions of carbohydrates in the body are they are used as a fuel during high intensity exercise. Carbohydrates spare protein in order to preserve muscle mass. And lastly, they are the main source of fuel for the central nervous system, your brain. Next, we have proteins. Some of the functions of proteins in the body are they are part of tissue structure. They are part of organ tissues such as muscle, hair, skin, nail, bones, and so on. They are also an important constituent of cellular plasma membrane. They are involved in transport, cellular transport, and uh, various hormone systems. They also make up enzymes that regulate metabolism. And then we have fats. Some of the functions of fats in the body are they are a very important form of energy reserve. They protect vital organs by insulating them, and they also act as a mode of transport for fat soluble vitamins. And then you have some essential molecules, which could be some essential fatty acids that you need to make sure that you eat them as a part of your diet. Likewise, we have some essential amino acids that we'll talk more about when we talk about amino acids. And then you have some micronutrients in the form of vitamins and minerals. So what is the DRI, Dietary Reference Intake? The Dietary Reference Intake is a system of nutrition recommendations from the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences and is intended for general public health. DRI is the general term for a set of reference values used to plan and assess nutrient intakes of healthy people. These sets of values, which can vary by age and gender and special conditions such as pregnancy and lactation, include primarily four values: the estimated average requirement, EAR, the recommended dietary allowance, RDA, adequate intake, AI, and tolerable upper intake level, UL. The estimated average requirement is the daily intake value that is estimated to meet the requirement in 50% of the individuals in a life stage or gender group. At this level of intake, the other 50% of individuals would not have met their nutritional needs. So essentially, EAR gives you the number that will meet the nutritional needs for 50% of the population. The recommended dietary allowance is the average daily level of intake sufficient to meet the nutrient requirements of nearly all, or approximately around 98% of healthy people. The estimated average requirement forms the basis for calculating the values for recommended dietary allowance. Adequate intake. If sufficient evidence is not available to calculate the EAR, a reference intake called adequate intake is used instead of RDA. The adequate intake is a value based on experimentally derived intake levels or approximations of observed mean nutrient intakes by a group of healthy people. The tolerable upper intake level is the highest level of daily nutrient intake that is likely to pose no risk of adverse health effects in almost all individuals in the specified life stage group. As the intake increases above the upper level, the risk of adverse effect increases. I like to refer to this chart more as I like pictures more than text. So what this particular chart really tells you is on the x-axis you have the observed level of nutrient intake. On the primary y-axis you have the risk of inadequacy 0 means there is no risk of inadequacy. 1 means a level where 100% of the population faces the risk of inadequacy. On the secondary y-axis is the risk of adverse effects. So 1 means 100% of the population face the risk of adverse effects. So EAR is at 50%, which means that at the EAR, you are meeting the nutritional needs of 50% of the population. The risk of inadequacy is 50%. RDA, the risk of inadequacy is approximately 2 to 3%. Most of the population, around 98% population, is uh, getting their nutritional needs complete. Then you have the upper level. Anything between RDA and upper level, you have no risk of adverse effects. If you consume higher amounts than the recommended upper level, you increase the risk of adverse effects. Estimated energy requirements. In 1992, the food guide pyramid was released as the image for a healthful diet. It emphasized foods from the 5 major food groups: grains, vegetables, fruits, meats, and dairy. Fats, oils, and sweets were represented at the very top of the pyramid. The message was that each group provided some but not all nutrients, and no one food group is more important than the other. The criticism of this pyramid was the way that the foods were listed. Some people saw the large uh, grain group on the bottom and thought that it was more important than fruits or vegetables. Others saw the top as the most important, and that would mean that fats, oils, and sweets were the most important part of their diet. This particular icon was replaced by what is called the new food pyramid. The food guide pyramid was modified in such a way that the goal was a more personalized approach to healthy eating and physical activity. The image now had colors representing each of the food groups that were spread across the pyramid instead of being stacked from top to bottom. A person climbing up the stairs on the side was added to emphasize physical activity. Now, going back to the slide, in June 2011, the First Lady Michelle Obama unveiled the what is the My Plate icon that has replaced the food pyramids. My Plate is an image that is to be used as a tool to help Americans make healthier food choices. The goal is to get people to think about building a healthy plate at meal times. So let's take a look at the energy content of food and how it's used. The amount of heat released per gram of food is the energy content of food. It is calculated from the heat released by total combustion of food in a calorimeter. It is expressed in kilocals or calories. Different food components produce different energy content or have different number of calories. Fats have the highest energy content. So the values for the energy content of different foods are carbs and proteins have the same, which is 4 kilocals per grams. Fat has the highest, 9 kilocals per gram, and alcohol, which is metabolized to carbon dioxide and water, has 7 kilocals per gram. The energy generated by metabolism of the macronutrients is used for primarily 3 energy requiring processes that occur in the body. One is the resting metabolic rate, which uses up around 60% of your daily caloric intake. The next one is the thermic effect of food, which we'll talk about more. And then the third component is the physical activity. So what really is metabolism? Metabolism is the set of life-sustaining chemical transformations within the cells of living organisms. The 3 main purposes of metabolism are the conversion of food or fuel to energy to run the cellular processes. Secondly, the conversion of food or fuel to building blocks for proteins, lipids, and some other biomacromolecules. And lastly, the elimination of nitrogenous waste. Resting metabolic rate. Resting metabolic rate is the energy expended by an individual in a resting state. Formerly, this used to be called as BMR or basal metabolic rate. It represents the energy required to carry out the normal bodily functions such as respiration, blood flow, ion transport, and maintenance of cellular integrity. The thermic effect of food, also known as diet-induced thermogenesis, is a reference to the increase in metabolic rate that occurs immediately after ingestion of food. When you eat food, your body must spend some energy in form of calories to digest, absorb, and store the nutrients in the food that you've eaten. Therefore, as a result of the thermic effect of food, by consuming calories, you actually increase the rate at which your body burns calories. And lastly, you have physical activity. Physical activity is nothing but the muscular activity which provides the greatest variation in energy expenditure. The amount of energy consumed depends on the duration and the intensity of your physical activity. So what are some of the factors that affect the basal metabolic rate? Number one is gender. Males usually have a higher basal metabolic rate than females of the same age because males tend to have a higher proportion of lean body mass than females of the same age. Conversely, females tend to have a higher proportion of fat cells, and fat cells have a lower metabolic rate than lean muscle cells. Second common pathological cause for a higher basal metabolic rate is fever, since a rise in body temperature increases the rate of cellular metabolic reactions. Third is the environmental temperature. There is a phenomenon called shivering thermogenesis. As you shiver in the cold, you are making the muscles work. Working muscles increase the basal metabolic rate. Fourth is the thyroid status. The thyroid is an organ that is responsible for regulating the metabolism and, to a certain degree, influences the weight gain and weight loss. Because a person with hypothyroidism has a low BMR, the person is more likely to gain weight. Many people who have hyperthyroidism are likely to experience some weight loss. If the thyroid is extremely overactive and if the person is not consuming extra calories to compensate, the weight loss can be significant. Next, you have certain special conditions such as pregnancy. BMR is increased in pregnancy during the third trimester. Additionally, while lactating, women have a greater energy output of about more than 200 calories, difference of more than 200 calories than when lactation has stopped. And lastly, age can be an influencing factor. There is about 1 to 2% decrease in BMR through every decade of your life. So while a person in his 20s might have a caloric requirement of about 2000 calories, a person in his 60s has a significantly lower caloric requirement due to the increase in age. So this slide basically summarizes the ratio of your caloric expenditure during each one of these activities. So BMR takes up around 60% of your calories. Your diet-induced thermogenesis spends around 10% of your calories, and the extent of your physical activity can take up to 30% or more of your calories. Now, this is really where a person can lose weight or gain weight. If you have a nutritional deficit due to the extent and the intensity of the physical activity, you will end up losing weight. On the other hand, If you're not spending these 30% of your calories performing some kind of physical activity, your calories are not used, the nutrients are stored, and the end result is the inevitable weight gain. This slide really throws up some estimated numbers of how many calories are burned during each of the activity. And on the right hand side is a reference range for what percent of your calories come from a particular macronutrient. So carbohydrates form the largest group. So an estimated 45 to 65% of your calories come from carbs, around 10 to 35% come from proteins, and around 20 to 35% come from fats, of which at least around 10% of your calories of fats need to come from polyunsaturated fatty acids. And what this word means, we'll see shortly. So dietary fats. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, some of the functions of dietary fats is the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, such as vitamins A, D, E, and K. Of all the three macronutrients, dietary fats is the one that is associated with diseases. There is a strong correlation between the consumption of dietary fat and coronary heart disease. Evidence linking dietary fat to cancer or obesity, on the other hand, is much weaker. In the past, dietary recommendations emphasized decreasing the total amount of fat and cholesterol in the diet. However, research now indicates that the type of fat is more important than the total amount of fat consumed. Okay, and this is where we really need to take a look at these different kinds of fats. Saturated fats. Consumption of saturated fats is positively associated with high levels of total plasma cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, with an increased risk of coronary heart disease. What you really mean by saturated fats is something we talked about when we talked about functional groups, alkanes, all of which have a single carbon to carbon bond, are saturated. So saturated fats have all single bonds. The main sources of saturated fatty acids are dairy and meat products. These are fatty acids with not even a single double bond. Monounsaturated fats. Fatty acids with one double bond are referred to as monounsaturated fat. They are unsaturated because they have one double bond, and they are monounsaturated is because they have just exactly one double bond. Unsaturated fatty acids are generally derived from vegetables and fish. When substituted for saturated fatty acids in the diet, monounsaturated fats lower both total plasma cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. This ability of monounsaturated fats to favorably modify lipoprotein levels explain in part the observation that Mediterranean cultures with diets rich in olive oil, which is high in monounsaturated oleic acid, show a low incidence of coronary heart disease. The Mediterranean diet contains seasonally fresh food with a lot of plant material, low amounts of red meat, and olive oil as the principal source of fat. Next, polyunsaturated fats. Fatty acids with more than one double bond are referred to as polyunsaturated fats. The effect of polyunsaturated fatty acids, or abbreviated as PUFA, on cardiovascular disease is influenced by the location of the double bonds within the molecule. And we'll talk more about that. The human body is capable of producing all the fatty acids it needs except for two, the linoleic acid and the linolenic acid. The linoleic acid is an omega 6 fatty acid. The linolenic fatty acid is a omega 3 fatty acid, and we'll see what these numbers and names exactly mean. So linoleic acid is numbered as 18 colon 2 with a 9 and 12 in parentheses. So the 18 here is the number of carbons in this fatty acid. 1 plus 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 17, 18. 2 is the number of double bonds in this fatty acid, 1 and 2, making it polyunsaturated. 9 and 12 is the number of carbon carrying the double bond. So you have a double bond on the ninth carbon. So you always start with the acid end because that is considered to be the first carbon. So that makes the first double bond on the ninth carbon, the second double bond on the 12th carbon. That's what you have in the parenthesis, 9, 12. And then this is a omega-6 fatty acid. What makes it an omega-6 fatty acid is that the last double bond is 6 carbons away from the tail of the fatty acid. So considering that there are 18 carbons, the last double bond on this fatty acid is on the 12th carbon, making it 6 carbons away from the end of the fatty acid. That makes it N6 or omega-6 fatty acid. Likewise, you have the linolenic acid, which is the omega-3 fatty acid, also written as 18 colon 3 because you have 3 double bonds, first, second, and third. You have 9, 12, and 15, which is the number of carbons carrying the double bonds. And again, this is omega-3 fatty acid because the last double bond is 3 carbons away from the end of the molecule. That makes it omega-3 fatty acid. So that's about the structure of the omega-3 fatty acids. Now both these omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids have to be consumed from the diet and are therefore called essential fatty acids. Both of these fatty acids are needed for cellular growth and repair and a host of other functions, and are also used to make other fatty acids. For example, arachidonic acid is formed from these fatty acids. And then lastly you have the trans fatty acids. Trans fatty acids are chemically classified as unsaturated fatty acids but behave more like saturated fatty acids in the body. That is, they elevate the serum LDL, or in other words, the bad cholesterol, and therefore they increase the risk of coronary heart disease. Trans fatty acids do not occur naturally in plants but occur in small amounts in animals. However, more commonly, trans fatty acids are formed during the hydrogenation of liquid vegetable oils. For example, in the manufacture of margarine and partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. Trans fatty acids are a major component of many commercial baked goods such as cookies and cakes and most deep fried foods. And this is really where the hydrogenation comes into picture. Hydrogenation of oils is a process in which a liquid unsaturated fat is turned into solid fat by adding hydrogen for long-term storage of these particular food items. So during this processing, the type of fat called trans fat is synthesized. So let's take a look at the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids. So it is recommended that 10% of your dietary fat is in the form of polyunsaturated fats. Omega-6 fatty acids are essential, just like with omega-3. They are necessary for human health, but your body cannot synthesize them. Therefore, you have to get them through food. Along with omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids play a crucial role in brain function, normal growth, and development. Men with low blood levels of omega-3 fatty acids are 3 to 5 times more likely to suffer sudden death from heart disease than men with higher blood levels of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids from fish oil possess the unique ability to reduce triglycerides. There is no doubt that omega 3s do this quite effectively. Actually, there is a FDA approved prescription fish oil called Lovaza to treat a condition called hypertriglyceridemia, a genetic condition in which a person has very high triglyceride levels. Omega 3 fatty acids, prescription or otherwise, reduce triglycerides, um, and therefore they are extremely important as a part of diet. Now, speaking of LDL and HDL, I did mention LDL as being the bad cholesterol, HDL is the good cholesterol. Let's take a look at what these differences really are. So, if you look at the structure of LDL and HDL, you will see that around 50% of LDL is made up of cholesterol and cholesterol esters, other forms of cholesterol. On the other hand, you have only 25% of your HDL made up of cholesterol and cholesterol esters. A large portion of HDL is actually made up of proteins, 40%. Only about half of that, 20% protein, is a component of LDL. Now, in addition to the structure, it is also the kind of roles that they play in the body that make one a bad cholesterol, the other one a good cholesterol. So, as a lipid, as a fat, cholesterol does not mix with water and therefore cannot travel freely in your blood. Because of this, your body must pair cholesterol with proteins, making a complex called a lipoprotein. Lipo is the fat part of it, protein is the protein part of it, to transport cholesterol through your bloodstream to cells that need it for various functions. Now, cholesterol is not all that bad. Cholesterol is a very important component of all of your cell membranes. So, every cell, every tissue in your body does need cholesterol. Low density lipoproteins, or LDL, and high density lipoproteins, HDL, are these two types of lipoproteins in your body that carry cholesterol. Although LDL and HDL both play roles in transporting cholesterol within your body, they have very different forms of doing it. So the main difference is where exactly do they carry the cholesterol? LDL brings the cholesterol to the cells throughout your body and therefore can cause cholesterol to build up within your arteries. So LDL takes the cholesterol from the liver where it's synthesized to various cells of your body. And while it does that over a period of time, it can lead to increased buildup of cholesterol within the arteries. This buildup can eventually lead to arterial blockage and an increased risk for heart disease and stroke. On the other hand, you have HDL, high density lipoproteins, which are beneficial to your health because these are scavengers. These are HDL are particles that carry cholesterol away from your heart and other organs and bring it back to the liver where it can be recycled or it can be excreted out of your body. This is what makes LDL the bad cholesterol and HDL the good cholesterol. Okay, so after fats, the other second important macronutrient is the dietary carbohydrates. The primary role of dietary carbohydrates is to provide energy. They also have the important function of um, having the protein sparing effect. What that really means is if your intake of your carbohydrates is low, amino acids in the proteins are broken down to provide carbon skeletons. Basically, it's carbon containing compounds for the synthesis of glucose that is needed as a fuel by the central nervous system. If the carbohydrate intake is less than 130 grams per day, substantial amounts of protein is metabolized to provide precursors for gluconeogenesis, which is the process of synthesizing glucose. Therefore, carbohydrate is considered to be protein sparing because it allows amino acids to be used for tissue repair and maintenance rather than for gluconeogenesis. Now, there are four primarily types of carbohydrates. You have simple carbohydrates, that have a simple molecular structure and are made up of 1 to 2 sugar molecules, monosaccharides and disaccharides. The simplest form of carbohydrate is glucose. Simple sugars that are found in foods include sucrose, table sugar, fructose, found in fruit, and lactose, which is found in milk. Then you have complex carbohydrates, which are also made up of sugars, but the sugar molecules are strung together to form longer, more complex chains, which are called polysaccharides. Complex starchy carbohydrates include whole grains, peas, beans, which are rich in vitamins, minerals, and fiber. The problem with complex starch carbohydrates is that often they are refined. What I mean is, refined carbohydrates are foods where machines have been used to remove the high fiber parts from the grain. When a complex carb is refined, it loses its complex structure and with it all the properties that make it a healthy choice. Instead, now it becomes somewhat like a simple carbohydrate and is processed by the body in the same way. A common example of the difference between a complex carbohydrate that becomes refined is your brown rice. Now your white rice is refined from the brown rice. So while brown rice provides more of fiber, um, is considered to be somewhat of a moderate glycemic index food, white rice is not. And then we have the most important form of carbohydrate, which is the fiber. Fibrous carbohydrates tend to be mostly the green vegetables. These are full of fiber, which is the indigestible portion of plant material. This means that much of this food passes straight through the gut and is not absorbed, and therefore they are great colon cleansers and are essential for keeping the digestive process running clean and healthy. Even better, fibrous carbohydrates are very low in calories, and it is virtually impossible to binge on these fibrous green vegetables. So, some of the health effects of fibrous foods is they tend to reduce constipation. They soften the stools by acting as a colonic broom. They increase bowel motility, which is they increase the movement in the bowel, and while doing that, they reduce the exposure of gut to carcinogens. So, the fibers dilute the fecal carcinogens, um, which otherwise would promote tumors by increasing colonic cell proliferation, and therefore they reduce their intestinal transit time, hence limiting the exposure of the colon to carcinogens. They decrease the absorption of dietary fat and cholesterol, increase fecal loss of cholesterol. One of the ways soluble fiber lowers blood cholesterol is through its ability to reduce the amount of bile that is reabsorbed in the intestine. So, this is how it works. When fiber interferes with the absorption of bile in the intestines, the bile is then excreted in the feces. Bile is the solution that contains the cholesterol. To make up for this loss of bile, the liver makes more bile salts. The body uses up the existing cholesterol to make the bile salts. This is how fiber can reduce the uh, cholesterol in your body. Uh, Fiber then generates a sensation of fullness. It reduces the blood glucose concentration, and which is kind of linked into the glycemic index. So, what glycemic index really is that it is a number that is associated with a particular type of food that indicates the food's effect on a person's blood glucose level. The glycemic index represents the rise in a person's blood sugar level 2 hours after the consumption of the food. A low, so you have low GI foods, you have moderate GI foods, you have high GI foods. A low GI food releases glucose more slowly and steadily, which leads to more uh, suitable postprandial, which is after meal, blood glucose readings. A high GI food causes a spike or a rapid rise in blood glucose levels and is suitable for energy recovery after exercise or for a person experiencing hypoglycemia. But for the most part, high GI foods are not considered to be very healthy because they produce these insulin spikes which can lead to over a period of time can lead to insulin resistance. So eating too much of high glycemic index foods can actually lead to an increased risk for type 2 diabetes, uh, heart disease, and also high GI foods are more associated with being overweight or obese. So foods with low GI tend to produce a sense of fullness for a longer time, which in turn reduces the or limits the caloric intake. Some of the low GI foods, to give you an idea, are oatmeal, uh, carrots, celery, whole wheat bread, and so on. Some of the high GI foods are potatoes, pretzels, white rice, baguettes, and so on. Then we have the third micronutrient, which are the dietary proteins. Now, this table on the left has the PDCAAS values. What that really means is it is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. It is a method of evaluating the protein quality based on both the amino acid requirements of humans and the body's ability to digest them. So, for example, egg or milk proteins are considered to be the complete proteins. Not only all of the amino acids in eggs and milk proteins are important for your body is able to assimilate all of them. On the other hand, you have something like gelatin, which has a very low PDCAS value, which means not all of the protein in gelatin can be absorbed by the body. Same goes for whole wheat bread. And then you have another example here, which is how many amounts of essential amino acids and which are these essential amino acids is something that we'll talk about in the next lecture. But how many of these essential amino acids are present in the food that you're eating? So now, for example, you have beans that have large amounts of lysine, an essential amino acid, but they have very low amounts of methionine and cysteine, the other two essential amino acids. Wheat, on the other hand, has very low amounts of lysine but has more of methionine and cysteine. So together, beans and wheat make a good source of these essential amino acids. So what really happens when you consume excess protein? When you consume excess protein, the excess protein, unfortunately, like the carbohydrates, which can be converted into glucose or fats, are not stored in the body. The amino acids are deaminated, and the carbon skeleton can be used to make up glucose, which can be used as a source of energy, or the carbon skeletons coming from the broken down amino acids of the proteins can be used to make this very important molecule called acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl coenzyme A is a very important molecule, as you will realize towards the later part of this course when you talk about fatty acid synthesis. So it is a very important precursor to fatty acid synthesis. So nitrogen balance. So what exactly is nitrogen balance? It is the measure of nitrogen input minus nitrogen output. Now remember that protein is the only micronutrient to contain the element nitrogen. So any excess nitrogen in the form of free ammonia is used to synthesize urea in the liver. Excess proteins are eliminated from the body as urinary nitrogen. Okay, so you have free amino acids which are broken down from the proteins that you consume, which can be either used to make new proteins, they can be used as precursors for the synthesis of essential biomolecules like heme or purines and pyrimidines, the what make up the DNA, your adenine, cysteine, thymine, and guanine, or the free amino acids can then be broken down to excrete from the urine in the form of urea. So when do you need to have the different forms of nitrogen balance? You need to have a positive nitrogen balance where your dietary nitrogen consumption exceeds the nitrogen excretion, which is essential during formative period of growth during childhood and pregnancy. You need to maintain a nitrogen balance in your healthy adulthood. And if you end up with a negative nitrogen balance where the consumption of dietary nitrogen is less than the excretion of dietary nitrogen, it can lead to some form of catabolic stress, which could be in the form of sickness or it could be in the form of physical injury. And then we have some micronutrients. Micronutrients in the form of vitamins and minerals are required in trace amounts, very little amounts. Some of the important minerals are calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, and iron. I won't be talking about vitamins right now because we'll be talking about vitamins at a later time point. We have an entire lecture that will be dedicated to vitamins. So some of the important minerals are the ones listed here. Calcium and phosphorus. Now calcium, as you would all know, is used to build up strong bones and tissues. Now some latest research actually shows that calcium needs phosphorus to maximize its bone strengthening benefits, and taking a lot of calcium supplements without enough phosphorus could be a waste of time and money. Researchers say that it's the first time that two of these minerals have been shown to be codependent for bone health. Both calcium and phosphorus are found naturally in dairy products, but most calcium supplements and calcium fortified foods and beverages don't contain phosphorus. More than half of all bone is made from phosphate, and small amounts are also used in the body to maintain tissues and fluids. So calcium, in addition to being important for the structure and health of bones and teeth, also has some other functions, such as it's important in muscle contraction, it is required for nerve impulse transmission, is involved in ion transport and signal transduction across cell membranes. Now with all of these different functions of calcium, how exactly is the amount of calcium in the body controlled? So what happens when you have low plasma calcium or low levels of calcium in your body? A hormone called PTH or parathyroid hormone is secreted by the parathyroid glands and is responsible for regulating blood calcium levels. This particular hormone is released whenever blood calcium levels are low. So PTH increases blood calcium levels by stimulating a particular type of cell called osteoclast, which can then break down bone and release calcium into the bloodstream. So PTH is released in response to low blood calcium levels and can increase the calcium levels by targeting the bones, kidneys, and the intestine. In the intestine, via kidney, PTH enhances the absorption of calcium by increasing the production of activated vitamin D. Without activated vitamin D, your calcium levels cannot be or calcium cannot be absorbed in the intestine. So by increasing the amounts of activated vitamin D, your PTH indirectly helps your intestine absorb more calcium. So there's more increased absorption of calcium, and the release of calcium from the bone in turn leads to higher plasma levels of calcium. So what happens when you have extremely high levels or exceedingly high levels of high plasma calcium? Another hormone called calcitonin is released. Calcitonin can be considered to be sort of the um, contradicting factor to PTH, whereas PTH plays a role in increasing plasma concentrations of calcium. Calcitonin plays a role in decreasing the plasma levels of calcium. The way calcitonin works is it decreases the bone resorption. It um, it prevents the bone from breaking down and releasing calcium into the blood. And on the other hand, calcitonin can also increase the excretion of calcium and phosphate from the body. So, through this bimodal mechanism of decreased bone resorption and increased excretion, it can help lower down the blood plasma levels of calcium. Then you have some other minerals such as sodium, potassium, and chloride. These minerals are not only important to regulate your blood pH, they are also important to maintain the osmolarity of intracellular and extracellular fluids. What I mean by osmolarity is nothing but the measure of solute concentration defined as the number of osmoles of solute per liter of solution. So where do you find some of these ions? Sodium uh, is found in the fluid outside of the cell. Okay. Excess sodium is excreted in the urine. Sodium regulates the total amount of water in the body, and the transmission of sodium into and out of the cells plays a key role in critical body functions. Potassium is found inside of cells. Okay. The proper level of potassium is essential for normal cellular function. Among the many functions of potassium in the body are the regulation of heartbeat and the function of muscles. Chloride is found in the fluid outside of the cells. Chloride also has a key role in helping the body maintain a normal balance of fluids. Then we have iron. Iron is a very important component of heme proteins. One of the heme proteins that you probably might be aware of is hemoglobin, which is used for transport of oxygen throughout your body. In addition to that, iron has various other functions. Along with vitamin C, uh, iron is absorbed from the intestine. Iron deficiency can lead to various anemias, and we talk about a whole level of different kinds of anemias in your DDM 8 in your third year. At the same time, you also have to bear in mind that your body has a very limited capacity to excrete or get rid of iron, which means that it can easily build up in organs like your liver, heart, and pancreas. Now, this can be quite dangerous because iron is a potent oxidizer. It can easily form free radicals. Free radicals of oxygen are the species which are highly reactive, and they can go and react with your um, your DNA, your cell membranes, which in turn can damage your DNA or cell membranes. So these free radicals can cause quite a extensive damage to your body. So because iron is a potent oxidizer, and typically it's stored in liver, uh, excess excess iron in the body uh, can be a contributing factor towards diseases like liver cancer and cirrhosis. Okay, so that's it for this particular lecture about nutrition.